everybody. Thank you so much for being here. I always have these moments right before we turn on the camera. And so I want to talk to this a little bit before we get started with what kind of the subject matter is today. Also, know if you're able to be here and withstand listening to this, being in these energies, it's because you are also dealing with this aspect of it, which is really showing up, right? It's been incredibly challenging to feel like we have anything worthy, anything of value to bring forward. And it really goes back to this source connection. What is source? Source is within us. We are source, right? And yet, where there is something that happens to the human that cannot feel that cannot remember that, so much of what I often feel is this thing where I say, yeah, I started to feel really nervous 10 minutes ago too. So yeah, exactly. This thing where I say that, okay, I have something to say now, but what about tomorrow? And what about after that, right? That essentially is a disconnect from my own source, because source is always evolving and growing and expanding, as are we, right? So whenever we feel these things, whenever we have these thoughts, just know that it's something, it's not you, right? But it's something somewhere inside, or something you have come in contact with, something that you have learned that has impressed this to you, that you are not always turned on, tapped in. So in doing these live videos now, this is part of it, right? This is part of where I'm having to move through this piece too, which is saying that, why show up, right? Why show up at all? But we are, as I talked about the other day, there has been a very, it's interesting how these words want to come through, a very serious disconnect in the energy fields as far as these control systems, right? So we're just beginning to experience the beginning of this transition. And I can even hear inside of me, right? It's like, here's how I'm feeling it. This is what is true. And then there are all these energies that come in. I can hear it as voices, as these impressions, right? It wants to say, well, this is the fallout, right? This is like, you should be afraid of this coming down, this crashing, this dismantling, right? And yet that's really these old systems. And truly, how does the matrix get dismantled? It gets dismantled from within us. These voices, these energies that we feel that keep us suppressing what we're feeling, right? So one of the ways that I have really started to look at this, and again, it only happens because this is just my experience, right, is through the lens of codependency. And we all have these tendencies, right? And especially if we've had a lot of trauma, the effect of that is going to be much greater within us. And yet there's something very curious that is going on right now, where it seems to be very much exacerbated. But codependency, right, at its core is really a form of control. It is us trying to keep control, or keep ourselves feeling like we are in control, right? But that essentially is that sense of safety that we are trying to find within our own selves. And what I started to realize was that as these things were kind of taken out of my life, right, and I was left to just face my own self, it wasn't me or my self-hatred or how I felt about myself that I was having to face. It was the realization of how much I was affected by living in this world, right? Just the people and places and things around me that impressed these ideas into me and this way of being. And then it became how I moved about this life in this world. So, but underneath all of that, right, is essentially this sense of disconnect from who we are. And this is what we're really, truly struggling with at this time. Is not so much about in the outer reality, although the outer reality is certainly reflecting this, right? Like, how are we controlled through all of this? But it is truly, how did we learn to manipulate our own selves, but manipulate the situations around us, or manipulate ourselves in such a way that those things, those people, those situations around us would meet our needs, right? So this is, Abraham Hicks will often talk about this. Yeah, it's so annoying. Like, if these people would just do what I need them to do, I would feel okay. If these situations would just show up in my life the way I need them to be, I would feel okay, which again essentially keeps us from facing inside of ourselves where all of this has been so deeply occurring, right? That kind of origin, or that seed point of all of it. So there's a flaring up, right, of again looking through the lens of the codependency, the codependent behaviors, and yet again it is a symptom of the deep systems of control that are here. And more than that, where I see the energetic control happening is that our bodies, right, the nervous system, all these things in our biology that we feel we have no control over, that's what is getting affected, right? This dysregulation. Because even if we know that when so and so says something, we behave in a certain way, right? There is this inability to really stop that reaction because of how deeply it is wired within us, right? So this is what we're talking about. It's like it goes beyond just knowing these things. Energetically, the body has been being affected, and this is what we're starting to experience, right? That somewhere in the system, this has been released, this lockdown on the nervous system. Really, I started to see it, the nervous system in the planet itself, right? But then in our own energetic fields. So it can be kind of confusing right now. Um, and I'll just speak from my own experience because I think that's the easiest way to talk about this. Um, so, for instance, in my family, scarcity and lack is just a huge thing, and I started to realize um, this is such a driver, and I've always felt it. And I talk about this in our group sessions all the time. It's like this film, or this barrier, or this layer, right? That if I'm driving and I see something, I think, oh, wouldn't that be nice? Immediately, and it took me a while to realize that this was happening, right? But immediately this thing comes over me like, yeah, well, it's never going to happen. You don't have the money for it. Like you don't, right? And it's like, and I started to realize, okay, this is something, as I've gone back, right, that existed ever since I was, probably before I was even born. Of course, it's in the ancestry, it's in the lineage, right? So without even realizing, it's like there is this atmosphere within me that really doesn't know how to interpret an opportunity in any other way than I can't have it. It's not going to happen. And yet this isn't just about my mindset, right? Because I've always been very much interested in how does the mind work, in empowerment, in positive thinking, right? All those kind of gurus. Like, I've read it, I've studied it, and yet could never get it to really kind of sink in. Um, and so what I keep saying too, it's like, well, gosh, at the end of the day, it only proves more and more that there have been things here. There are controlling systems here, right? Because why have we had this inability to actually release from these things? So, okay. Okay. So I'm gonna, yeah, that was, I'm gonna go into a little bit of energy work here too, because see, these are the energies that start to come in too that say, that you're fooling yourself, you're lazy, you just didn't work hard enough, you haven't tried hard enough, right, to overcome this. Um, and this is again where I start to think, well, these systems that are here in terms of this lifetime, in terms of spirituality or energetic work, that have really also added this extra layer of damage that we are working through at this time too. Um, and they're quite intense. And where I start to feel them again is at this heart base here. So, because there are absolutely, I don't want to say people, right? But as much as energies that have learned how to utilize this trauma. Um, it's really this idea of like marketing, right? It's like the system plays to our wounds. Um, we are hooked in because of our wounds, right? And it becomes this cycle over and over. And this is what we're really, this is the range we're really working at, right? Right at the root of all of this control that stems from these original wounds. Okay, so yeah, okay. So just coming into this heart space here. Again, there's grief, but this grief, it is so instilled, right? It's like it's my fault. I want to blame myself for my inability to get free from this. And it's all in the, I'm feeling this in the, like the back side of the left lung here, like almost into the ribs, but it's really in the tissues here. And there is this like unsettled, this trembling feeling, right? Okay. And also, this creates this sense of I'm never going to get out of this system. I'm never going to break free from this. It's massive fear and panic that starts to come up as well. Okay, good. Because at the core of this too, and again, remember there's so many layers of this. So when I say it, it's not just like one way. Um, but at the core of this too is this inability to truly feel that we have the answers within our own selves. And really what I hear also is that I have the right within my own self. And it starts to get a bit weird too, because what we also find, right, for so many of us who have been embedded in these layers of trauma, when we do go to seek help, right, it's another way that we are really brutalized. In many ways, especially if we look at the spiritual communities too, which is a lot of the ways that we all kind of, because we couldn't find help, right, or we weren't finding relief, we turn to these places. And what tends to happen is that it's another kind of, it's another layer of being embedded in the trauma. Because, and I know this sound like when we have sessions, right, or we go for things like psychic readings or Akashic readings or things like that, there's always this layer of there's something wrong with you, and that you cannot either figure it out on your own, or that you're doing something wrong about it. So it gets a bit confusing, right? Because again, there's so many parts and pieces and it's incredibly complex. But this is really that trauma where it's very, I forget the name of that, right? Where you start to identify with your abuser, right? But this feeling of like, it's very up close, personal in my face. Oh, because so many, when we all are, right, we have to recognize we all have these woundings, right? But so many people that we also work with, they have their layers and levels of wounding. And that, again, just like in any relationship, we are always acting from our places of wounding, right? They will come up. That's really the dysfunction and the issues that we come into. So we're hitting into well-meaning people, usually for the most part, right? And yet our wounds are colliding. It's creating this like layer of I want to call it like interrelational trauma within the trauma fields themselves. And it's even causing, like, it's very hard for me to even get to the root of what I want to say with this, which is that our bodies, right? We are source. We have this innate wisdom within our bodies, and our bodies know. Our energetic fields communicate through our bodies. And yet we have been conditioned, we have been traumatized out of that belief. So we just keep bringing this deeper and deeper through the heart space here as we continue to talk through this. Chono kosha I chata kai kasha I chata jasha I chata. Just releasing. Right? We learn to deeply distrust what we are feeling, of course. Kasha I chata jasha. But at the core, on some level, it's like we don't actually believe we hold the wisdom within us. But we have been trained out of that belief. Right out of that knowing. And again, this is where we're starting to see how deeply affected the bodies have been, right? If you could sit in your knowing and hold still within that knowing and not have these bodily reactions that are causing you to panic and freak out, right? We could get in here. Okay. So we're going to start to bring your source light focus here. Breathing life here. Breathing light here. Also into the base of your brain. Because immediately the energy wanted to jump into these masculine ranges. Like, I have to do something. I have to think about it better. I have to think about it harder. I have to understand it more. Let's bring this back to the center, into the core, into your source. It's not almost like we are so repelled from our own source here. Okay, so clearing here. Continuing to bring this in more and more strongly. Okay, let's bring in your lavender tones here. These are yours, reclaiming these. Where they were taken, where you were intentionally disconnected. From feeling your own power. You were intentionally manipulated. You learned how to discredit, how to disregard. Your own information, your own wisdom. And knowing too, this is part of what we are also struggling with at this time. It is incredibly awkward to sit in our own energy. It feels very, very raw. And the subtleties and the nuances as these old ways of being and operating, right, through these negative biases. They like to weave their ways in to twist and coil. Good. So just breathing here. We've been taught to disconnect from our bodies. It's the primary means through which we become manipulated, and yet being fully present in our body is the safest space. It is where we have the deepest connections to our own selves. And if you'll notice, this is so much of what has been taught in these previous years. To get out of the mind, get out of the body, connect to your higher self, connect to your higher source. And yet that higher source is here within you. Jao taki chakai chashi. Good. Let's come to the front of the forehead. We're going to start to also dispel a lot of what has been placed here. That you don't know how to activate your own power. That you need someone or something else to guide you. Releasing this from the temples of the mind. Okay, feeling that at the gut range too. Good. Jo onokoya kachai. Okay, so wherever any of the energies that you have come in contact to, it's interesting because the way I would normally want to say that is come in contact with, right? But that understand the power of your energy field and how it has been used against you when you have come in contact to others, thinking that they were reflecting back to you something perhaps you needed to work on. There's this concept of, everything is a projection of our energy field and this mirroring. But at deeper levels, understand the capacity of your light to hit into all. So when it starts to activate into another's wounding, oftentimes what is really reflected back to us is where our light is hitting into the other's wounding. Okay, we started to see some of this coming through the group where we were talking about the capacity to hold. It's not even the capacity, right? You are this. The level of light that you hold, is essentially like a truth serum. That in the face of your light, things cannot help but reveal themselves. But due to this level of manipulation, understand most likely what has been occurring up until now is that because of these levels of dysregulation and then those patterns of wanting to please, we would bounce right out of our energy, and then it would be reflected back to us from these others, whether it's people, places, or things. That it was really our issue. Good. And of course, this isn't to say that everything in this world does not also assist in showing us where these things are. And yet, these deeper layers and levels of manipulation, because of the light range that you are, clearing this through the palms of the hands. These marks, Tokoshai. Jano Kosha Ichatokoya. Being able to trust in your own will. Tohokosha. Being within the center of your own space, of your will. Tohoshai. This is not something to impress onto others. You're not seeking to control, command, or direct anything outside of ourselves. We are simply to be within this light, within this presence of our own soul. And yet, where we have been unable to be fully within this is where so much of this additional trauma and distortion has sourced from. Good. Feeling that release there. Okay. All right, so there was a big release. I felt that at the base of the brain. It's like in the, probably really the lymph, right? I feel it in the ears. And this has really been the hardest. I would say this is the hardest piece of it, right? Is to, as I was describing earlier, it's not so much about our own internal trauma as much as being able to really recognize that this has been happening to us, right? For whatever reason, it's incredibly hard for us to allow. And also probably because as a source being, right? If we're saying, okay, we are source, it sources from us, we are in control. It's like, but there is this layer where that also was not true, right? There were other things. So it's almost like it splits out the psyche or the mind a bit here. And I started seeing this a while back. You know, people will talk about this being like a prison planet or a control system here. It's like, this is a system of many control systems. So it's not just one. And it's also why, you know, there's so many different experiences here too. And why we have to learn to drop more deeply into our own selves. Because even if certain things resonate, right, it's not going to be exactly the same for any of us. Let's clear through this feminine range, the one that wants to have control, the one that wants to be seen as all-knowing. And why do we do this? It was one of the realizations I had, that staying connected to things, staying in relationships where even though I knew there was something wrong, something was off, it was keeping me from facing my own internal reality, right? We could say this is, well, it's about needing to be authentic. But truly, until we can face the level of control that has been impressed into us, that we have been oppressed by, it's very hard to find ourselves. And the problem with that too is that facing the level of control that we have been subjected to also shows us where we have internalized this and then also are controlling others, right? So yeah, there's that toxicity through the front of the mind. Yeah, there's some really intense, distorted, I'll just call them feminine ranges here. Right? These empires that have been built on oppression and control. Let's come through the backside of the field here. Let's bring your source light into your root ranges. Start to build from here now. As you know, as you understand, as you learn to trust. Trust being within your body. Trust that you have always known. And that what you do not yet understand or feel that you do not know will all be revealed. Good, allowing that to anchor all the way up into the ground. Okay. Jano kosha e jakosha e chatakasha yakashi chakaya. Okay. So I'm just being reminded, I wanted to address someone made a comment on the last live afterwards, saying that all of a sudden she's really cut out sugar. It's been much easier for some reason than it was. And that because of that, she's feeling so much more clear. And I do want to say that That's what we're talking about here, right? Um, Things that prior to, I will say, just within the last 3 or 4 months, but really prior to August of last year, we were unable to really clear or get a handle on for ourselves. The intensity or the ability now to clear these things within us is much greater. And it's something I've been noticing too. All of a sudden, my body is just much stronger. I have much more energy. I'm finding I'm only really eating like every other day. Um, so it does come back to this, I was talking almost about this bias, right? This veil of negativity that I've had all my life, right? I'm really having to know that and understand that and still hold into the truth of what I know, right? It's kind of, I always go back to Abraham Hicks with this, where it's like, and it's true, right? Because even what we're seeing is actually in the present or in the past, because it does take time to get into our brain and for our brain to process what we're actually seeing, right? So everything in our reality is actually our past, right? And so if we are living in our past, how are we creating a different future, right? But that's where we hold into the energy, we hold into this feeling within our heart, we hold into this peace, and we hold that as the knowing that even if what we're seeing through this projection right now is not what we are ultimately desiring, that we are there. And I did have a moment the other day too where, there are all these things that I feel I need in my life that I would like to have. Right now, it's more about the supports that I need. Um, but they are coming. But what I've noticed is I'm like, oh, look, there's that. But I have to take advantage of it, right? And that's the piece right now that feels really hard because the cells, the tissues in my body are just so used to being like, oh, so much work. It's so hard, right? Like, oh, here we go again. So this rawness, again, that we're feeling in these ranges, I just want to encourage you to continue to be, well, maybe not continue. It's like, I don't know if I've ever been gentle with myself, right? But to continue to allow for the expansion of this within your heart, to continue to allow for the knowing of this to really start to infuse into yourselves and to hold into this truth, even though you may feel like you have messed up so much, even though you may feel like you are this ultimate failure, even though all the evidence in the world points to the contrary, right? We are on a very different kind of path here, which has been unknown even to us, which in many ways, right, is a relief. But really owning this, allowing ourselves to embody this. Allowing ourselves to be at peace with who we are. And yet, through our human experience, we have not yet had the full ability to feel that, right? We have not yet experienced the full honor of our own selves. Just going to make a comment. There was a comment on the last, in the chat on the live stream. Sometimes I miss things. Someone said something about like in the ear because they had been belligerent with their partner. And I want to say that's what's happening, right? That's what we're seeing. That's what we're starting to notice. We are breaking this down in a very human way, right? Kind of, I always talk about reverse engineering, right? And that's part of it. So be gentle with yourself. And I've been talking about this a little bit too, when we do these things, right, that we are not proud of, and we have a lot of shame around it. Rather than disconnecting from ourselves in anger or detaching from another, or the situation in anger, we're having to really look at it, right? From this space of who we are, which is love. That's what source is. It's love. It's one and the same. So in many ways, we are, I don't want to say being forced, right? But that's essential. Like, we are here and this is what's happening. We are being forced to experience this through the energy of source. And yet we're making the corrections as we go along, right? So it can feel like we're still messing up. It can feel like we're getting it wrong, and then we want to add that shame component to it, right? But we're working backwards through this now. And I think it's a really brilliant thing that came up when I was having this conversation with a friend of mine the other day, that yes, we've awakened that feminine range, right? That is the energetic range. We are awakening through our masculine range now, which is very, very different. And this is the process, going through this in the body, dismantling this in the body. But yet we have this energetic capacity, right? Our energy field, which is here communicating with us. And yet the very vessel through which we receive this communication is the very thing that is sick, right? So we have to allow ourselves this time and this grace to allow all of this to descend within us. So if you're relating to any of this, I have really felt, again, not that I totally identify with that story, right? But this concept of like Jesus having to walk this path of the crucifixion, right? This is what it feels like. And it's not about other people necessarily doing this to me, but having to face this pain within my own body. There's a range of this in the heart. It's really talking about what it means to be sensitive, what it means to be an empath in this suffering. There's again, there are these, through the human language, this is the best way to say it, these manipulative energies, but ones that don't fully understand how to work with energies, that have been misinterpreting and miscommunicating to you how this actually works. So much of what we feel, and even when I think about my own work, so much of how I understand the energy cannot be communicated through words, right? It has to be experienced. It has to be felt. So the miscommunication and the misinterpretation. There's something about there's almost like, that word belligerent, which I know I was mentioning before from the stream from yesterday, but that really feels actually like a child that, when a child is having I was going to call it a trauma, a temper tantrum, right? They're actually trying to sort through this impression of trauma. They're not able to rectify what they're feeling with what they're receiving. It's a sorting process within one's own body, right? Which is your source energy field, trying to make sense of, trying to process. And that's okay. And what we want to allow for ourselves, but also when we're talking about children, right? But also we have our own past experiences as a child. The energy field is always going to bring the human back upright into alignment. So wherever this process is short-circuited, or wherever someone else's wounding and trauma overrode this natural sorting process, it's where we will hold those wounds. Feels a bit like the nervous system gets shocked. Good. Let's continue to clear at the base of the lungs here. The shame, the grief around how we show up then, right? Our inability to fully process out our own emotions. But because that cycle got interrupted, then we internalize that as something being wrong with us. It's like we interpret it as an operator error, right? There's something wrong with me. And in fact, what happens is it's the external, that machine operator, right? The person clearing this from the front of the mind. It didn't know how to allow this completion. Good. So giving you some space and some distance from those feelings of those experiences. Okay, so part of what you might be feeling are those old energetic waves from childhood, right? That kind of the trembling, the fear, the shaking, where you weren't able to fully complete through the body. Just feel these ranges, heavy, heavy layers of mind control here. We're beginning to lift out of the field. This is good. Out of the gut. Okay. You can feel this, it's like a cloud, right, around the head here. Also, there's a bit of a reference to that crown of thorns. Okay, but we're releasing. Out of the ranges of the child, your childhood experiences. No longer owning this as who you are. Let's bring your light here into the center here. Start to dispel these myths about who you are, these beliefs. Good. Realigning your soul's purpose. Chao tokosha I chakoya. Good. There's this big, it's almost like a physical realignment here too. Kosha I cha. Good. Clearing through the solar plexus here. Chao tokosha I. Bringing this into the front of the mind. Clearing through your heart. Kosha I. Just connecting with that potency of your soul. Every particle of your being, even in the spaces between the particles. Shokoya Dakicha. Chao no kosha I chatak. Chao, chao jai chai. And anchoring this into your base, into your root. Dispelling the myths of who you are. Chao kosha. Okay, dakosha ichaya chaka. Okay, so I'm just starting to feel to step back here. So I just want to make you aware too that if you're really deeply feeling these things, if you're feeling like you need more support, we do group sessions every Monday and Wednesday evening at 7 p.m. Central. I do have a new space. I haven't been putting much of the light language work on YouTube lately. I do have a new space. But the purpose for that space is to allow you to come in there, to utilize that to build your own energetic reference. And this is something we've all struggled with as we've been trying to find our way through all of this. And the way that I describe it is really like a parent and a child, right? How the parent would lend its nervous system to the child in order to help support it through learning how to work through those emotional experiences, right? So what I do over there is I will put the light language attunements there, but I also break it down. I will go through it. And of course, they are living light recordings, right? So every time we release something, when we go back, we hear more things. We have a deeper understanding through each of the recordings. So it is always evolving its own self, right? But what tends to happen is, and this is how it really worked for me, was that how do I work with my light, right? How do I understand how to work with energy? I really needed to be able to work with something else in order to see that, oh yeah, I did know that. I did see that. Okay. We all interpret things differently. We all have our way of communicating, and yet the energetic base is the same, right, of what we're picking up on. So it's a way for you to understand how you are already connected to your energy and just maybe aren't fully aware of how you work with it or how you process it. But I also put the sketch videos there as well as some other things that I'll be adding to it. But that is there, and everything would be on my website to be able to connect all of those things uh, as well. This coming Sunday, I'm going to be doing a soul group session. I've been doing them not really every month, but it's a smaller group. It's only a handful of people, and I'm going to reformat it a little bit just to be able to hold space for each of you individually to bring, I don't want to say your issues, right? But it's really to allow your field to step forward, and just give you some validation, really. And again, it's not about any of us needing to be told what to do or how to fix ourselves or how to work our energy, right? It is that this is innate within each of us. And we're just having to learn to let go and really learn even where those unhelpful parameters have been set into our fields, right? That cause us to disbelieve that we are really capable of doing this for our own selves. Okay. All right, guys. It's been wonderful. I hate to leave. Thank you so much for being here. It's really important, I think, that we come together, because, as I said, it's not just about what we're working through in our own energy fields. There is this greater energy needing to push through as this collective, right, of souls, of who we are, that have really been taught and told that we don't have worth here. So thank you so much for helping push through this. All right. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Take good care.